You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean, and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about Havana syndrome. So it's over to you now, Mark, for this week's medical mystery.
Havana syndrome, which is also known as anomalous health incidents, or AHIs for short, is a disputed medical condition which started in 2016 with both the US and the Canadian government officials and their families. Reported symptoms of Havana syndrome include a sudden onset associated with a perceived localized sound with chronic symptoms that last for months, along with disabling cognitive problems, balance, dizziness, insomnia, and headaches. And although Havana syndrome is not officially recognised as a disease by the medical community, there are reported symptoms of AHIs, or anomalous health incidents, in about a dozen overseas locations, with some people having reported experiencing symptoms in various countries and in a variety of circumstances, which include hotels, at home, in vehicles, and whilst walking the dog outside in the suburbs. Several government and non-government agencies have all conducted various investigations into the AHI's phenomena, with official investigators having provided various theories on its cause. And although the main theory is that it is brought on by sound, other theories include directed energy weapons, psychological, meaning social factors, or toxic chemicals. However, no direct causal relation has ever yet been established. The US government has established a variety of programs to provide medical and financial support to persons who reported having symptoms of Havana syndrome. However, some AHI patients continue to campaign for extra additional help. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in again and listening to this medical drama episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, and a man with a very dark and disturbed sense of humour who lives by the phrase, eat right, stay fit, and die anyway. But just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every Tuesday, the occasional Wednesday, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, the darker side of some past celebrities, and the occasional missing person that often goes unnoticed. So, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of the episode subject that I can reply to, a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. Or if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. And if you get a few minutes, perhaps you might like to check out my social media groups and pages, including Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, which are filled daily with all things unexplained and crime. I'll put a link to some of my socials in the description. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the conspiracy or non-conspiracy around the story of Havana syndrome. And this week's necessary disclaimer: this story is a tale that sadly involves people suffering through physical and mental health and touches on the subject of animal testing, so may prove upsetting to some. You listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. Also, I apologise. So I'll try that again. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly, like that sentence then. My English, although it is my first and only language, should improve real soon, as I have found out that the best way to improve your memory is by doing unforgettable things. Or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, I forget. Let's get back to this week's story. Havana syndrome itself is characterised by a variety of symptoms which include dizziness, headaches and pain, along with a few cognitive problems. However, at the same time, it is not a disease that is recognised by the International Classification of Diseases Diagnostic Manual. On an interesting side note here, and just to help start the show a little, the International Classification of Diseases, or the ICD for short, is a globally used medical classification that is used in epidemiology, health management and clinical diagnosis, which is maintained by the World Health Organization and is directing and coordinating authority for health within the United Nations system. The ICD was originally designed as a healthcare classification system that provides a method of diagnostic codes for classifying diseases, which include the nuanced classifications of a wide variety of signs, symptoms, abnormal findings, complaints, social circumstances and external causes of injury or disease, helping to map out health conditions to corresponding generic categories together with specific variations. The International Classification of Diseases Diagnostic Manual is published by the World Health Organization and is used worldwide for morbidity and mortality statistics, reimbursement systems, and automated decision support in healthcare. According to some reports, most of the affected individuals of Havana syndrome reported an acute onset of neurological symptoms that were associated with perceived localized loud sounds such as screeching, chirping, clicking and or piercing noises, with 2/3 of reported sufferers having visual disturbances such as blurred vision and sensitivity to light, and more than half reporting intense pressure or a vibration in the head, along with ear pain, diffused head pain and cognitive problems such as forgetfulness and poor concentration. And 1/3 of cases also reported tinnitus and hearing loss, with 1/4 of sufferers claiming dizziness or an unsteady gait. And some affected individuals reported chronic symptoms that last for months, such as balance, cognitive problems, insomnia and headaches. However, the longevity of these particular symptoms is not clear, and they are less specific than the acute symptoms. In an earlier review article, which was written by Asadi Puya, who is a professor of epilepsy at the Shiraz University of Medical Science in Iran, back in 2022, he considered several possible causes for the Havana syndrome condition. The review stated that a plausible explanation for the condition was the use of a directed energy or radio frequency weapon, along with other possible causes, which included things like functional disorders, psychogenic disease, or exposure to chemicals and or neurotoxins. However, the author has cautioned that all studies included in the review were limited by small sample sizes and that the underlying cause still remains unidentified. And in a 2019 article, which was written by the authors Robert E. Bartholomew and Robert W. Balow, concluded that Havana syndrome itself was erroneously classified as a novel entity due to a moral panic based on the fear of foreign entities such as the Russians or Cubans attacking the US, the over-interpretation of data, misconceptions about psychogenic illnesses, and the coverage and leaks by the media. Or in layman's terms, they mean scaremongering. On a couple of noticeably short but interesting side notes here, a psychogenic illness or a psychogenic disease is a condition in which mental stressors cause physical symptoms that may or may not match another known physical disorder. And a moral panic, which to be honest with you I didn't even realise was a thing until now, so just how dumb am I, is a widespread feeling of fear that some evil person or thing threatens the values, interests or well-being of a community or society. The authors, Robert E. Bartholomew and Robert W. Balow, also stated that the US intelligence community had concluded that Havana syndrome is, and I quote, a society-constructed catch-all category for an array of pre-existing health conditions, responses to environmental factors, and stress reactions that were lumped under a single label. A 2024 review article by Connolly et al., meaning and others, after surveying multiple peer-reviewed studies, which included several probable causes such as mass psychogenic illness and head trauma, concluded that the cause of Havana syndrome, or again AHIs for short, is still unknown. After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at how Havana syndrome impacted around the world and how the FBI conducted its own investigation into the phenomena.
Dare to discover the unknown? Book your own paranormal investigation at HAPRC 2026. The Haunted Antiques and Paranormal Research Centre, HAPRC, are now taking 2026 bookings, and your next supernatural adventure is just a £50 deposit away. New for 2026, we have upgraded. Our location now features improved sound insulation in all our windows, making it easier than ever to hear what should not be there. Bring your team, bring your equipment, explore the unexplained, record the impossible. Limited slots available. Secure yours now. Book now, believe later. HauntedResearchCentre.com.
In the January of 2018, the State Department convened an Accountability Review Board, which was led by a retired United States ambassador, to review the department's handling of the Havana syndrome phenomena, or AHIs. And in the March of 2018, a team of computer scientists at the University of Michigan reported in a study that ultrasound, specifically an intermodulation distortion from multiple inaudible electronic signals from malfunctioning or improperly placed Cuban surveillance equipment, could have been both the origin and the cause. Also, again in 2018, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, otherwise known as the FBI of course, produced 2 reports on AHIs. With a first report in the January of that year, internally released as a non-public report by the FBI's Operational Technology Division, which found no evidence of a sonic attack or any involvement of foreign adversaries. And the second FBI report, again carried out in 2018 and which was conducted by the Behavioural Analysis Unit, which visited Havana, came to the assessment that the individuals who claimed to be suffering from Havana syndrome were experiencing nothing more than a mass psychogenic illness. Strangely enough, though, and according to reports, it appears that the investigators from both the FBI studies did not speak to any of the people directly who claimed to be affected, but instead relied on prior interviews that other investigators had already conducted with persons who were claiming to be suffering with AHIs. In the March of 2018, and at the request of the US government, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, or UPenn for short, examined 21 allegedly affected diplomats who were posted to Cuba, and the preliminary results were published in the Journal of American Medical Association, or JAMA for short, with the research finding that there is, and I quote,
"No evidence of white matter tract abnormalities
in the allegedly affected diplomats beyond what might have been seen in a controlled group of people at the same age. However, they describe, and again I quote,
a new syndrome in the diplomats that resembles persistent concussion,
with some of those affected recovering swiftly and others having symptoms for months. So the study from the Journal of the American Medical Association concluded that, and once more I quote,
the diplomats appear to have sustained injury in widespread brain networks.
And in the September of 2018, Douglas H. Smith, who was the lead author of the UPenn study, claimed in an interview that microwaves were, and I quote, considered a main suspect that was underlying the Havana syndrome phenomena. However, in late 2018, some scientists said that the microwave hypothesis was implausible, describing the conclusions of the UPenn study as nothing but, and I quote, science fiction. If you remember in my introduction, I mentioned how one of the theories behind the cause of Havana syndrome was associated with perceived localized loud sounds such as screeching, chirping, clicking and or piercing noises, with 2/3 of reported sufferers getting visual disturbances such as blurred vision and sensitivity to light before they eventually collapse. Well, in the January of 2019, a biologist going under the name of Alexander L. Stubbs at the University of California in Berkeley, along with Fernando Montealegre of the University of Lincoln, I hope I said his name right there, analysed some of these audio recordings of some of these strange sounds that were recorded by the American personnel in Havana during the incidents that were associated with Havana syndrome. The conclusion that both the biologists eventually came to was that the sounds being generated were the calling songs of the Indian short-tailed cricket, Anerugogylius celerinictus, rather than those of any technological device. Stubbs and Montealegre analysed and matched the cricket's calling songs, pulse repetition rate, power spectrum, pulse rate stability, along with the oscillations per pulse, with both biologists finally reporting, and I quote,
the causes of the health problems reported by embassy personnel are beyond the scope of this paper.
They continue, and again I quote,
more rigorous research into the source of these ailments, including the potential psychogenic effects, as well as possible physiological explanations unrelated to sonic attacks.
So, what of the psychogenic cause that was proposed in 2019 by the aforementioned Robert Bartholomew and Robert Balow, claiming that all the AHIs for anomalous health incidents cases represented a mass psychogenic illness rather than a novel clinical entity? citing that the vagueness and inconsistency of symptoms, as well as the circumstances they developed in affected staff being under significant stress, as at the time the US had just reopened its embassy doors in Cuba, asserting that the Havana syndrome itself is a pure example of the Nikobo effect, which is the fear of an anticipated harmful event, meaning something like an energy weapon attack, for example, which may cause symptoms. And although AHIs are psychogenic in nature, according to scientists, the symptoms experienced by the patients can be very real. On an interesting side note, the nocebo effect is said to occur when a patient's expectations for a treatment cause the treatment to have a worse effect than it otherwise would have. For example, when a patient anticipates a side effect of a medication, they can experience that... I'm going to do that one again, sorry. For example, when a patient anticipates a side effect of a medication, they can experience that effect even if the medication is actually an inert substance. Sorry about that. The complementary concept to the nocebo effect is, of course, the placebo effect, which is said to occur when expectations improve an outcome. During 2023, the International Journal of Social Psychiatry published several articles and commentaries supporting the psychogenic hypothesis, by both criticising the energy weapons hypothesis and questioning whether some earlier Havana syndrome studies that were published in the aforementioned Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA for short, were in fact inappropriately influenced by politics. As at the time of writing and researching for this show, the US government has not released any official numbers of people who have been reported to have Havana syndrome or AHIs, but media reporting indicated that there was a total of 26 people in 2017, 40 people in 2019 and 130 people in the May of 2021, along with more than 200 by September that same year. And by early 2022, more than 1,000 people had reported symptoms of Havana syndrome, with all these cases claiming to affect the CIA and the US military, along with State Department personnel and their family members. There have been various people from around the world who have reported experiencing Havana syndrome, not only in about a dozen countries, but also in a variety of circumstances, which include hotels, at home, while in vehicles, and whilst walking the dog out in the suburbs. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at how Havana syndrome has affected people around the globe and some of the lawsuits and compensation awards.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk, or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk. where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
In the March of 2023, the American political digital newspaper Politico reported that the US Army funded a $750,000 grant to Wayne State University for a study to expose 48 ferrets to RF waves, which are otherwise known as radio frequency waves, comparing the effects to those from a control group of ferrets, with the Department of Defense describing the project as an attempt to, and I quote, develop and test a novel laboratory animal model to mimic mild concussive head injuries, which was reported by the embassy personnel both in Havana and China as being similar symptoms to that of AHI. On a truly short but interesting side note here, a radio frequency wave is the oscillation rate of an alternating electric current or voltage of a magnetic, electromagnetic field or mechanical system in the frequency range from around 20 kilohertz. There now. Aren't you pleased I told you that? Anyway, I digress. You will be pleased to know that this RF waves versus ferret experiment was soon terminated when the animal rights group People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA for short, demanded that the Pentagon and all live animal testing in relation to Havana syndrome. The DoD, otherwise known as the Department of Defense, of course, is the province that is responsible for providing medical care to patients who report any AHI or anomalous health incident symptoms. And in the July of 2024, the Government Accountability Office, or the GAO for short, issued a report that surveyed the DoD's actions in providing the medical care to AHI patients, with the Government Accountability Office interviewing 65 of the 334 people that qualified for the health care that was provided by the Department of Defense. However, based on these interviews, the GAO found that most of these AHI patients were often confused by the process to obtain the care. So the Government Accountability Office then made several recommendations to the Department of Defense with the goal of both streamlining the process and improving its communications. In the February of 2019, several Canadian diplomats sued the Canadian government, arguing that it failed to protect them or promptly address any of the serious health concerns regarding its staff. However, in the November of 2019, the Canadian government sought to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that not only was it not negligent, but that it did not breach its duties to its employees. And although the government had acknowledged that several of the 14 plaintiffs in the suit had concussion-like symptoms, there was no definitive causes or medical diagnosis that had been ascertained, with Global Affairs Canada stating in the November of 2019 that, and I quote,
"We continue to investigate the political causes of the unusual health symptoms."
In response to the Havana syndrome phenomena, the United States Senator at the time, Susan Collins, introduced a bill which was co-sponsored by a bipartisan group of 9 other senators that would close a loophole in the Federal Employees Compensation Act that would normally not cover any damage to organs such as the brain and heart. And in 2021, Congress passed the Helping American Victims Afflicted by Neurological Attacks, or coincidentally Havana for short, Act, which authorized the CIA Director and the Secretary of State to provide financial support for personnel with brain injuries, with the bill passing the House and Senate unanimously and signed into law by President Joe Biden on the 8th of October in 2021, becoming public law number 11746. The law itself gives an untaxed lump sum payment of up to 1 year's full salary, or $187,300, for higher-ranking employees to government employees that can provide any evidence of a neurological injury, with this allowance being an addition to any workers' compensation or disability payments. After the initial AHIs, or anomalous health incidents, were made public in 2017, the Cuban foreign minister accused the US of lying about the whole Havana syndrome incident and denied any Cuban involvement in or knowledge regarding the cause of any health problems that their diplomats were experiencing. However, the Cuban government did offer to cooperate with the US in the investigation of the incidents, first by employing about 2,000 scientists and law enforcement officers, who then proceeded to interview 300 neighbours of diplomats, examine 2 hotels, and medically examine non-diplomats who had been exposed. And according to reports by NBC, Cuban officials stated that they analysed air and soil samples along with considering a range of toxic chemicals. But their work did not just stop there. Oh no, because on top of all that, they also examined the possibility that electromagnetic waves were to blame, and even looked into the possibility that insects could be the culprit. However, they found nothing. Zilch, zero, nada. Not a gram of anything that they could link to the claimed medical Havana syndrome symptoms. In 2021, a panel of scientists affiliated with the Cuban Academy of Sciences, convened by the Cuban government, reported that, and I quote,
"The narrative of the mysterious syndrome is not scientifically acceptable in any of its components."
The panel then also addressed the microwave hypothesis, which, if you remember, was one of the original testings from back in the September of 2018 by Douglas H. Smith during the UPenn study, writing, and again I quote,
"No known form of energy can selectively cause brain damage with laser-like spatial accuracy under the conditions described for the alleged incidents in Havana."
In the March of 2024, 3 news sources published the results of a joint investigation: The Insider, 60 Minutes, and Der Spiegel. The journalists interviewed persons who stated that some AHIs were possibly caused by the actions of the Russian military intelligence, specifically members of the GRU Unit 29155, who were known for undertaking foreign operations and received awards and promotions for their work related to the development and deployment of non-lethal acoustic weapons, with journalists interviewing sources stating that the telephone and travel records of some GRU agents matching the locations where a few US personnel in China and Georgia reported AHIs. However, the Kremlin press secretary dismissed this report as, and I quote, "nothing more than business, unfounded accusations by the media," And the US Vice President candidate J.D. Vance also ridiculed the report by saying that the journalists had, and I quote, lost their minds. On a couple of interesting side notes here. First, an acoustic weapon, which is otherwise known as a directed energy weapon, is a ranged weapon that damages its targets with highly focused energy without a solid projectile. It includes lasers, microwaves, particle beams and sound beams, with the potential applications of this technology to include weapons that target personnel, missiles, vehicles and optical devices. And second, the GR Unit 29155 is a Russian military intelligence unit associated with foreign assassinations and other activities apparently aimed at destabilising European countries. The unit is thought to have operated in secret since at least 2008, although its existence only became officially known in 2019. To be honest here at Unexplainers, the mystery behind Havana syndrome has made it a very complex phenomena, with its ambiguity and fear spreading and acting as its own multiplier, which in turn is making more and more individuals wondering if they are indeed suffering from it or not. A sort of placebo effect acting at its finest, as it were, which again in turn makes it harder for spies, diplomats and any other person with the word spy on their CV to operate overseas. But regardless of whether it is a real thing or not, I think it is safe to say that Havana syndrome has developed a life of its own.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 158, we are going to be looking at the Utah monolith. The Utah monolith was a metal pillar that stood in a red sandstone slot canyon in northern San Juan County, Utah, in the United States. The pillar was 3 meters tall and made of metal sheets riveted into a triangular prism. It was unlawfully placed on public land between July and October in 2016, standing unnoticed for over 4 years until its discovery and removal in late 2020. The identity of its makers is unknown, as are their objectives.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations, of course, was all mine. The voices in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Pooler, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley, and of course a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I will also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast if they're happy for me to do so. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. No AI was used or harmed in the making of this or any other episode of Mark's Unexplained World. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.